Welcome back to the Caregivers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropoleski, and you can call me Dr. Mark. On this show, we often talk about the person who steps in as a caregiver. A family member gets the call after the fall. A spouse sits beside the hospital bed. An adult child hears the discharge instructions, asks the questions, remembers the medications, and helps carry someone through that big moment when they can no longer manage alone. But what happens when you're the one who needs care and there's no one whose role it is to step in? Our guest today is Dr. Sara Zeff Geber. Sara is one of the leading voices on solo aging, a term she helped bring into wider use to describe people aging without reliable family support when care is needed. That can include people without children, people without partners, people who are widowed, estranged, geographically isolated, or people whose support network may care about them but may not be able to actually manage a crisis. This conversation is not just about living alone. It's not just about loneliness. It's about the moment independence is no longer enough. It's about what care actually requires when there's no one already in that role, and it's about the plan that has to exist before an emergency arrives. Sara, welcome to the Caregivers podcast. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe and follow the Caregivers podcast wherever you're listening or watching. It's completely free, and it's one of the best ways to support the show and help these conversations reach more caregivers and families who need them. Dr. Sara Zeff Geber, welcome to the Caregivers podcast. We're so happy you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, in the tradition of the podcast, we're going to jump right in. And Sara, tell us, for listeners who may not know the term, what is a solo ager? And can you help us understand the different ways someone can end up aging without a reliable person to step in when care is needed?
Sure. It probably helps for me to tell you how I came upon that term in the first place, because to my knowledge, I am the first one to start using it, and I started using it about 10 or 12 years ago. And at the time, I had noticed that so many of my contemporaries, who we were all then in our late 50s, early 60s, were starting to spend a great deal of time taking care of their aging parents. And that wasn't a factor in my life because I had lost my own parents when I was in my 30s, so that was kind of behind me. And yet, here were people in their 50s and 60s who were taking care of their 80 and 90-something parents. And I was out with a friend of mine one evening, and she and I both do not have children. And I remarked on how much time she'd been spending doing that, and I said to her, "Sandy, who's going to do that for us?" And of course, we had no answer to that. And that is really what led me on the quest to figure out what, as solo agers, we could do. Now, at the time, I was defining a solo ager as anyone, married or single, who did not have children, because children are the obvious caregivers for their parents as the parents get older. So I started using it in that context, and so many people pushed back and said, I do have kids, but I still consider myself a solo ager because my parents live X thousand miles away, or I haven't seen my daughter for 12 years. All kinds of situations that people brought to me saying, "I'd like you to consider me a solo ager." So I thought, I need a new definition. So I changed the definition, and now, and for the past 5 or 6 years, my definition has been anyone aging or preparing for older life who knows they will not have the support of family.
Many people may assume that solo aging is mainly about living alone or even feeling lonely, but what do they misunderstand about what solo aging actually means?
Well, solo aging certainly doesn't mean that anyone is lonely, or that they have necessarily isolated themselves, or that they're unhappy. And some of the myths that we hear about solo agers are, well, they're really psychologically not quite right, or they're lonely, or that life leads you to become selfish. So solo agers come in all different genders, sizes, sexual preferences. It just runs the gamut. And again, my original description, and the one that I still do strongly urge people to consider if they are in the situation where they do not have adult children is that they are uh, putting themselves at risk, not knowing who is going to kind of quarterback their care if and when they need care. So that's the real distinction.
So, just so listeners are clear, and I think it's a really important distinction, you can solo age with a great quality of life and be very active and very engaged and very holistically involved with the world around you.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that people don't understand or just had no reason to look into at any point in their lives is the fact that almost 20% of baby boomer women did not have children. So that's a huge number of solo agers right there. And that's almost double the rate of solo aging in all previous generations. So you're starting out with a preponderance of solo agers among baby boomers. And then if you take a look at the what I call the family diaspora in this country, kids grow up, they move away, they go to college, or they move away for some other kind of job, and as often as not, they don't come back. So they're now living several thousand miles away, often from their parents. And like I have a neighbor around the corner from me who she and her husband have two children. Sorry, no, she and her husband have one child, and he had the nerve to marry a Danish woman. And so, where do you think they're raising their kids? They're in Denmark. They're in Copenhagen. And my friends at this point are perfectly healthy and able to go visit them several times a year, but that won't always be the case. So it's a very typical example of people who have a long distance relationship with their adult children.
Well, gone are the days when many people didn't travel past 100 miles from their birthplace, right? That's just
Yes,
not
gone are
our
the
world
days.
anymore.
Yeah.
Is there a moment, Sarah, when a solo caregiver, is there a moment when a solo ager realizes, not just fears, but really understands when care is needed and that there may be no one waiting in the wings?
Well, the solo agers who get it the easiest are those who were responsible for care for their own parents. And they've seen the trajectory that aging often takes. If you aren't taken out of the game by heart failure or cancer or one of the top killers, if you aren't taken out in your 50s or 60s or maybe even 70s, then you're probably going to live a life that includes a point in life where you're going to need help. There's no disputing the fact that as we get older, we get a little more frail. We often end up needing other people to help us. So it's moving in that direction, and again, for people who have seen their parents go through that trajectory, they get it. They understand that they're going to have to set up something for themselves if they plan to live that long. And of course, I say plan in jest because we don't know. I mean, we all know people who have lived very, very healthy lives up into their mid-90s, living alone with no help. But what people often fail to realize is that that's the exception, not the rule. And it's an extreme exception in most cases. So it's again, it's understanding that there will come a point in your life when you'll probably need some help, and taking taking the time and the care to arrange for that ahead of time is what I strongly advise solo agers to do.
It's interesting how having been a caregiver sort of puts you in a learned state of mind that you kind of might be better prepared than you think, even if you are a solo ager.
Yes.
But without that experience, it could come as a shock. Is there a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing as a solo ager that no one's coming? Like not loneliness, but just the knowledge that if you become sick, injured, or frail, or can't speak for yourself, there's no built-in caregiver whose role is to step in.
I suppose it could. Um, I don't I've never thought of it in terms of grief. There's a realization and potentially some fear that sets in, possibly some grief over, maybe you may be grieving over your lonely, your not lonely, your more independent self, grieving over your uh, potential loss of independence. I'm Yeah, I think most people really strive to remain as independent as they possibly can. And that doesn't usually involve, or the image of that doesn't usually involve somebody taking care of them in what ends up occasionally being a more intimate way.
I think there might be some grief also in mourning the absence of communal warmth or family warmth that comes as elders transition to a more frail state, but still have a quality of life that's in an
Well,
adaptation with the help of others,
it feels like you're talking about grieving over something that you may never have had.
or
And I
may
don't
never
think
have. Yeah.
people do that.
Hmm.
I mean, most, I shouldn't say most, many um, many solo agers have led very independent solo lives very happily for often decades. And um, the thing that I encourage people to do the strongest, and gosh knows it gets pushback, but I encourage people to build and maintain a community that often involves living communally. And I don't mean like an old 60s commune where you throw everything you own into a pot and it's a kind of a free for all, but finding ways to live close to people that you care about, that you like, that are your friends, and whether that means moving into a co housing community or maybe giving up your single family home where you don't know your neighbors very well, or at least very intimately, and choosing a life in like an active adult community where you are in a one level home or often a condo and you're close to your neighbors and there are organized activities. These are the kinds of things that can build community for solo agers when they don't naturally have one in their middle years.
It still provides an opportunity to give and maybe a redefinition of what is meaningful to the individual as they embark on that new journey. But it sounds from what you described, there'd be plenty of opportunities that can sustain meaning, contributions, activities,
Hmm.
looking after
Yeah.
new friends as things arise. Many of our listeners have spent years caring for someone else. There's no question about that. And I really like to know what happens psychologically when someone realizes they've been the person others could rely on, and then there may be no one who can care for them in the same way.
That's not one that's kind of within my purview to answer because I have never been a caregiver myself. Um, Yet because of what I do, what I talk about, and the milieu that I surround myself with, I understand that I will very likely need care at some point. So I'm not a good one to answer that question.
No. And from your entourage of experiences and people you worked with, do you get a sense that there's a spectrum of how people process that reality, and some get quite introverted and almost down and depressed, whereas others sort of can continue embracing and just reinventing themselves as they age solo?
Yes, a number of the solo agers that I encounter have been caregivers. Um, Occasionally, I run into someone who still is. but mostly I talk with people who are in their 70s and 80s, sometimes their 60s, and their caregiving days are usually behind them. So they've gotten religion because they had to do it, and they realize they're getting older. So that's my touch point on that.
Okay. So, when a solo ager has no reliable caregiver, what are the first parts of life and care that start to become unsafe? What do they need to be on the lookout for?
Well, before that ever happens, I recommend that they make sure that they have a very robust um, medical directive, advanced directive for health care, so that they have chosen someone in their life to speak for them if they cannot. Um, Same is true for their financial situation. To have gone to a financial advisor or someone who can help them understand how much money they have, how much money they may need, and where it's going to go, and whether their spending pattern makes sense for the money that they have. Because I think the last thing any of us want, solo ager or not, is to run out of money. I have, I can't tell you how many times I've been told by people who are not solo agers, I don't want to be a burden to my children. And my only response to them was, okay, so don't be, start planning. Because if you just sit there with the conviction that you're not going to be a burden and don't do anything about it, you're the highest form of hypocrite. So having a financial plan, having a care plan set up for yourself is very important. Now, I think the best way to kind of surround yourself with people who might fulfill those roles for you is to live closer to people. Also, I've known a number of people who have made these kind of agreements with close friends that they're going to be each other's person, and yet they are approximately the same age.
It is tricky,
And that
isn't it?
doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, it's going to make sense for one of them, but the other one is going to be out on a limb without a support system. So, when you're looking around for the people that you want to choose as your decision makers, your proxies, we call them, look to the younger people you know. It might be a younger niece or nephew or a younger sibling. Nieces and nephews are usually younger. Um, it might be the son or daughter of a friend. It's someone that you have hopefully known for a while and that you consider a responsible person, able to make those kinds of decisions for you if you're unable to speak for yourself, and that you then talk to them. Tell them what you would like in your life if you can't manage on your own. Is there a particular place you'd like to be? I encourage people. I I get such a response, such an unfortunately negative response to this, but I encourage people to look around their area. Understand where the skilled nursing facilities are. Understand where the assisted living communities are in your neighborhood or your greater metropolitan area, so that if and when the time comes that you need care, you can say, I've been to this particular community a couple of times. I like them. Call this person, let them know that I'm ready to come in, and hopefully they have space for me. So doing all that ahead of time is a pretty important thing. Now, for those solo agers who are able to afford it, I encourage looking into traditional senior living, which means a life plan community or a month-to-month rental community that where you can live independently, or if you need more help, you can move into the assisted living portion of that or pay an additional amount for assisted living. A lot of people think that they're just going to stay home and age in place. That is very difficult for solo agers. Very, very difficult. Now, if they're quite wealthy, they can hire all the help that they need, but that's a very lonely existence when the only people you see are the ones that come in to help you change clothes or get up in the morning. I think that, to me, that paints a very sad picture. And a number of studies recently have shown that moving into an assisted living community is actually cheaper than bringing help significant numbers of hours into your home. So consider those factors and check those out. You can easily find those statistics online. So consider that kind of what's called congregate living, where
Right.
you live close to other people, yet you have your own independent space.
Lots of important conversations need to be had with oneself when living and aging solo, but there's no way of avoiding them.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. You mentioned earlier that you often get negative feedback from what you were about to say. What's the negative feedback that specifically you were referring to?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you mentioned you often get feedback about some things that you say that maybe people aren't ready to hear, and it just sort of struck me as you mentioned it. Maybe it was about the certain types of conversations or looking at alternatives, but it just struck me for a moment. But
You'll have to tell me what struck you because
yeah,
I'm
no,
not.
we kept talking, and then I'm having a bit of trouble placing it. But I wanted to sort of follow up a little bit here about this, because one of the most frightening scenarios to me is cognitive decline in a solo ager. The idea of slowly slipping away from yourself when no one around you is there to notice. I mean, who sees the early signs when there is no spouse, adult child, or close family member watching the pattern over time?
I don't know. Who does? What kind of situation have you put yourself in? If you've moved into a congregate living kind of situation, then you have a much better chance of somebody catching that early. But that's a scary thing for all of us, whether you have adult children or not. It's scary for all of us, and there's not much that we can do other than pay attention to some of the guidance for keeping ourselves as healthy as possible, keeping our brains as healthy as possible. So there's no particularly different answer on that for solo agers. Again, being social, building a community around you is, in my opinion, the single most important thing that solo agers can do
I agree.
to ensure for themselves a rich later life.
Well, I think it creates sort of little nodes of opportunity for someone else to observe you and maybe strike up a conversation or maybe express a genuine concern to someone else in the community or in the position of leadership, but something that just sort of says, maybe we should check in on them, or maybe we should have a conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then what?
Well, walk us into the hospital room now. A solo ager has fallen, has had a stroke, has received life-changing diagnoses, and someone asks, well, who should we call? What happens when there's actually nobody to call?
Well, I'll tell you what happens, and it's not pretty. What happens is the medical community came up with a term for people like that. Before I came along and studied this and wrote about it, and they came up with the term elder orphan. And when I heard that term, I was absolutely horrified. It just sounded like the most negative way to describe someone without family. And yet, it does happen, and it's going to happen more and more if people don't do some planning around that. But back to your question, what happens? Well, you become a ward of the court, and the court assigns you a conservator and or a guardian, and all the decisions about your future are left to that person who never met you before, who doesn't know your life story, who doesn't know anything about you. And believe me, I I I tell that to people hoping they will open their ears and open their minds to what it means to build community so that that never happens to them. Because that is what happens.
What percentage of solo agers do you think just stay away from having those important conversations with themselves and others to sort of prepare? Is it 10%, 20, 50?
Well, statistics show that that's a fuzzy one because you're asking how many have the conversations.
Or
I
how
don't
many
know what.
seem prepared or unprepared, or how many sort of stand out and sort of say, I'm not going there. I'm just going with the flow.
Yep. Well, AARP did a study on that a couple years ago and found that close to 50% just, hadn't been there at all in their own minds as well as conversations. So
That's a striking number.
it's a striking number. Yeah, it's a striking number.
How much does our healthcare system actually depend on an unpaid family caregiver in the background? And
Mhm.
what are the implications to solo agers when that person just doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And of course, our healthcare system falls far short of being able, excuse me, being able to help people when they get older. We are, in my opinion, it's a shameful disregard of older adults in this country, and so we don't have the safety net. We don't have the social systems that some of our neighbors over in Northern Europe have. Um, so we have to, and that's you can. I don't know the exact numbers, but you have only to go to the AARP statistics to to look at how many millions of dollars are spent by family caregivers every year. And that's why it's so scary when you don't have a family caregiver and are going to need to rely on others somewhere.
I
So,
think the indirect costs for caregivers in terms of their own lost wages in lack of
huge
productivity are pushing $400,000 per person. And I think the average
per
annual
person.
spends about 7,500 US dollars per caregiver.
Yep.
Do you think this is a problem of evolution of a society that's just become so individualistic? Or do you think this is merely just the system that's putting profits over people?
Well, it's somewhat of a politically charged question, isn't
Hmm.
it?
It is.
Um, yeah. I think it's a function of a couple things. I think it's partially a function of how our society has shifted and changed. Again, I came up with the term family diaspora to describe what I see around me, especially people who um, are in more expensive areas. Their kids grow up, go away, can't afford to buy a home where they live, so they're going to move elsewhere, maybe several thousand miles away. Um, there's opportunity elsewhere. Some towns can't support a growing group of people coming of age and needing to work. So there's just huge numbers of people moving away from where they grew up and moving away from their own parents. It's partly that. It's partly a function of the horrendous divide in our country between the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots, as always, are left in the lurch without anything to rely on other than family caregivers. If you're wealthy enough, you can bring in aides and people to help to do that. You can help your elder relative move into a lovely retirement community where they'll get the help they need. But that's not universally true because it's not universally um, available to people just financially. So yeah, there are some. I I don't like to. be the Chicken Little running around saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling. But in many ways, for solo agers, it is. We really have to make plans. There's a company that I became aware of and I'm a big supporter of quite recently. They just opened their doors in January, called the Childfree Trust. And it is a solution for people who do not have children. That doesn't include all solo agers, but people who actually do not have children, to build um, an estate plan that doesn't involve an adult child or somebody coming in to rescue them. It's all done by these professional fiduciaries. So, it's a great solution. It's not horrendously expensive, but I think it's certainly available to the middle class at $1,000 a year. So it's worth checking into for people who do not have children, for sure. The states of California and Arizona have chosen to license professional fiduciaries. These are independent individuals who can take over that function. In the rest of the 48 states, I don't know. They don't have that option.
Keyword being fiduciary, and I think our listeners need to really understand that, where that's someone working for you who has your best interests in mind, who's not trying to sell you a product, who's not working for a bigger company that's trying to make profit by churning investments and things like that. So that's a really important word that's, I think, popping up on the grid a lot more these days: fiduciary responsibility.
Yes, and the term was born in the financial sector. It classically means when you hire a fiduciary, they are bound by law to work in your best interest,
Correct.
Not theirs or anyone else's. However, the noun fiduciary is a person, at least in these two states, is a person who can handle your affairs. And a number of fiduciaries, especially in California, because that's where I live and that's what I know, have opened their doors to being the healthcare proxy as well. I know my husband and I, we don't have children, we don't have any relatives that live anywhere nearby, and we will have a professional fiduciary manage our affairs. Obviously, we're going to be the primary person in each other's lives, but one of us will go first, and we don't know who.
Correct.
So when that happens, a professional fiduciary will step in and manage the affairs of the spouse left behind when that's necessary.
So what I'm hearing is that the process is achievable and doable, and there are blueprints. We just need to engage as solo agers in the process and be willing to be open to it. Now, many solo agers have people who care about them. There's no question. But that's not the same as having someone who loves them, knows their needs, and understands their wishes, and has agreed to step in when things get hard. So What is that gap between casual support and committed care?
That's a good question. It's a matter, and sometimes it comes down to having a conversation. If you have someone who cares about you, and ideally they're a good bit younger than you are, and you'd like that person to be your proxy, then you need to have a conversation. There's
And
enough,
build a relationship,
Yeah, it's amazing to me how many people I talk to who say, "Oh yes, I have an estate plan. I've named my nephew as my proxy for health care, and my niece is going to be my proxy for my finances." And my next question to them is, "So you've had that conversation with them?" "Oh no, I haven't talked to them about it. I just put their names down on the line." And can you imagine getting a phone call at 2 a.m. from some hospital saying you are the power of attorney for Jane Smith, who just took a bad fall and is unconscious? That's not something you want to spring on anyone, especially somebody you like.
And it certainly leaves them unprepared and probably shoots anxiety through the roof in terms of having to make a critical decision about someone they may not be as close as they need to be or should be when it comes to making those calls. So for a solo ager, I mean, the frightening question is not just who makes or who will make medical decisions for me, but it's also what happens if that person I chose can't do it anymore and there's no one else to call? What does a real backup plan look like?
There is no backup plan other than a court-appointed guardian.
So I guess if you do have someone, though, who you've designated, but you're witnessing them become more frail or maybe seeing cognitive decline in them or their health is slipping, you actually need to sort of work on kindling a new relationship with someone to maybe even take over for that person. It's not a static one-time event, but it's actually a real process that you need to
Mhm.
navigate and steer.
Yes, it's an ongoing thing, because that's why I suggest that people redo their estate plans every 8 to 10 years because the landscape changes. People change, people move, people's health situation changes, and that all needs to be taken into account. I If you sit down with an attorney to develop an estate plan, he or she will have you name at least two, if not three, backups to your proxies.
And what you just answered my next question is that it sounds to me like you need a chain of people or a
Hmm.
chain of options who've, clearly uh, agreed that if the person ahead of them can't step up, then they would be next in line. So I think that
Yes.
that's hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot easier to do when you've got a community and a network of individuals you've invested in, so you can actually come up with those 3 or 4 names, let alone
Yes.
one.
It's easier to do then, and it's easier to do when you are feeling good. It's easier to do when you say, oh, I'll put that off for another year or two. I've got time. You don't know whether you have time. So, if you're over 50, do it now. You'll change it. Things will change. But what if they don't? What if you don't have that time?
These are really important questions, which I think people avoid, but we need to embrace. Living independently as a solo ager works really well until it stops working well.
Hmm.
When a crisis happens, what are the caregiving roles that suddenly have to be covered? And how can a solo ager prepare for those roles before they need them?
Well, it just really in the way we've been talking about. There's nothing more that you can really do. You can make it easy on the people that come behind you by making sure you don't leave um, 2 tons of stuff you've collected over the years for somebody to sort out. Because that person you like a lot, that lovely niece that you have grown to adore over the years, she's going to be burdened with that. Is that what you want to do? Probably not. So, again, get busy while you're still feeling healthy and strong and be prepared for your later life.
It sounds like it's just planning. It's not like, a doomsday narrative. It's
Mm-mm.
just part of the next, we plan all our life. And the planning doesn't stop uh, at 65 or whenever you engage in that process. So I think
sometimes it sometimes it just starts then.
yeah, well, that's true too. And I mean, that's a really important thing. It's always a challenge if you haven't been a good planner earlier on to suddenly take on this task, but without any practice. But it's certainly one that still has a loud voice that calls. For a solo ager listening today who feels totally overwhelmed by our conversation, what's the first step, and what's like the one thing they shouldn't put off, but it can at least get things going?
I think the best place to start is to kind of take stock of where you are. Um, I wrote a book for solo agers, came out in 2018. It's still very, very relevant today. And in that book are a lot of worksheets and self assessments. Those are the kinds of things that will help you get started, that will help you start to think about some of these topics in the context of your own life. So I would encourage that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you have to run out and buy my book, but some kind of planning. There's a lot of other things, by the way, out there on solo aging now. I've had a number of people kind of jump on the bandwagon and become colleagues of mine. There's a wonderful website called Navigating Solo that a friend of mine in the Boston area started. And there are a lot of resources on that website for solo agers. So keep the internal dialogue going, keep thinking about it, and begin
Maybe
to
journal
do
about
a
it
few
even.
small things. Journal about it. That's a great idea. Absolutely.
Talk about journaling in so many other stages of life, but maybe that is like a real time where you've got some quiet and some of the background noise is gone, but you actually have a chance to sit with pen and paper
Yeah,
and
good point. Good
write
point.
some stuff to yourself. A lot of the strongest solutions like care managers, professional fiduciaries you referred to, patient advocates, senior living communities do require financial resources. Like, what's the roadmap for someone who's aging alone and maybe financially struggling?
Yeah, there aren't a lot of safety nets in the U.S., unfortunately. We are very unfortunately seeing an increasing number of people on the streets who are over 65. So that's the sad side of it. But if you have a stable place to live, number one, find out if there's a PACE program. PACE.
Or about
And
that?
I never can remember exactly what that stands for. But it's a program for older adults where it's kind of like an adult day program, but they have transportation. They will pick you up. They will bring you to their center wherever their activities take place. You will be there all day, have your meals there, and then will be taken home. So it's almost like being in a retirement community, but you don't sleep there. They are sometimes connected to low-income housing. So I would very much suggest looking into that. Another thing I would suggest is to get on the list in your community for government-assisted housing for older adults. It pretty much exists everywhere. Check with your county department on aging and see what resources are available in your community. Because unless you live in a very, very small rural community, I know there are some services. There are, because the Older Americans Act is still in force, and they supplement the funds for senior centers, for departments of aging. There are resources out there, but it really depends on you to understand where your resources are and make use of them. But again, the first question to ask when you contact the county department on aging or a senior center is there a PACE program in my area? And am I eligible? You have to be what they call dual eligible. You have to be Medicare eligible and Medicaid eligible for
There's a
PACE program.
theme. Yeah, there's a theme here that's really important, and I think it probably knows no boundaries. I think up here in Canada, there are versions of that. I think in Europe and Australia and elsewhere where we have listeners, find a means to build some community and connection outside of your home so that it can prepare you and also keep you feeling a little better with a sense of community and connection to start
Mhm.
engaging in that process, I think it'd probably be very empowering.
The one thing I've noticed about solo agers is, especially those who have been solo for a long time. So I'm not really talking now to the recent widows and widowers or recent divorcees, but more to the people who have been single for whatever reason. Maybe they lost a spouse decades ago, or they've been divorced for many, many years, or they never married and who never had children. And most of those people that I encounter, many of them friends of mine, have made fabulously rich lives for themselves. You go into any nonprofit in your community, and I almost guarantee you will find among the older volunteers a preponderance of people who are solo agers because they don't have family to kind of devote their time and energy and heart to. So they support the causes that they favor. It might be working in a food distribution center or a soup kitchen, or it may be working with abandoned animals. It could be just about anything. It could be working for a political cause you believe in. But you'll find a lot of solo agers there because that's how people without family bring meaning and purpose to their lives.
You hit the nail right on the head, and we're hearing more and more now about the crisis of meaning in our society.
Hmm.
And what a wonderful opportunity to gain strength as a solo ager in that context.
Hmm.
Do you think solo aging exposes something we just don't like to admit, that independence only works until life requires someone else to step in?
Hmm. That's an interesting way of putting that. Life only works. Well, yes, I guess you could look at it that way. There's so many different lenses through which you can look
You're
at
right.
this life. Um, I, I have to say, I think solo aging is probably a little easier for those who are kind of naturally gregarious. Those of us who are extroverts, who have been put ourselves out there and gather around us a group of people that we love and trust throughout our lives, even if that group has morphed and changed over the years. Mine certainly has. But if you have made it through this lifetime as more of a loner, then I think it's a heavier lift to set these things up for yourself. It just is.
One question that comes to mind when I was thinking about our upcoming discussion today is, do you think that solo aging will actually be different as an experience between the baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials?
Well, for one thing, I think we're blazing some territory here that's going to be well trod in successive years because the birth rate now is here in Canada and Western Europe, it's well below replacement level, and I don't. So anyway, let's just keep the conversation at that and not go into the issue of immigration. But well, I kind of have to in a way. At any rate, yes, I think we are the programs that we can set up today, the life plan guidance that we can set up today is going to be extremely helpful for people behind us, because as we know, medical science is keeping people alive a lot longer. There's a lot being written about longevity, longevity, longevity. Well, longevity is good as long as you're also healthy and happy and enjoying life.
A lot of
But
longevity comes with complexity.
yeah, it sure does, because all those conditions that used to end our lives, now medical science has made it possible for us to continue living with those conditions. And I'm, talking about heart disease and cancer and things like Parkinson's disease. millions of people are living with them, which of course means that there are millions of caregivers spending millions of hours taking care of them. So, you know, to a great extent, the best thing solo agers can do is take as good a care of themselves as they possibly can, which means all the things that we all get tired of reading about and hearing: getting exercise, eating right, making sure that we are leading as healthy a life as possible so that we will need less care as we get older.
Overcoming and avoiding frailty and maintaining meaning and human connection probably will be the best common denominator, I think. And I think the studies are out there to prove it, and they've been consistent.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's exactly right, Mark.
Well, Sarah, you're a solo ager yourself. And when you stop being the expert at the podium for a moment and simply become Sarah, what part of your own future are you still working through?
Um, my husband and I we decided many years ago, actually before I even got into this, because this is not my first career, but long before that, we had my husband's father, who lived in a lovely retirement community in Florida, and was, you know, the thing they had determined they weren't going to be a burden to their children. Well, they weren't. They put themselves in the hands of wonderful caregivers when they needed it, but mostly they lived a lovely independent life there. So my husband Chuck and I looked at each other and said, you know what? That's our future. We're going to have to plan for that financially because there's nobody coming up behind us to take care of us. So that is what we are doing. We recently made a commitment to move into a community not far from where we live, and they are doing an expansion right now. So they're actually building our unit, and we've put a down payment on it, and we barring any sort of catastrophe with the building of it or in our lives, we'll be moving in there in about 2.5 or 3 years. So that's one thing we've done, just looking at our own private lives. We had to plan carefully for that financially, starting when we were in our 50s. We also have long-term care insurance, which we purchased in our 50s. We also have talked to a number of fiduciaries, and it is a fiduciary that will now take the place of what is currently in our estate plan that involves a younger cousin of mine. But within the recent years, unfortunately, that younger cousin has had 2 bouts of cancer. So, even the 15 years younger that she is might not be the right answer. So the next time we do an estate plan, it will be with a fiduciary on that top line. So that's the reality for me. Again, my husband and I don't know which one of us will go first. Right now, we're both healthy and thriving. So, but that can change in a phone call. So
You're right.
it can change with one medical test. I'm in my mid-70s now, so we just don't know.
I'd like to thank you for your authentic stories today and your authentic advice. I think coming from a solo ager yourself, it's really meaningful to our listeners and is just so full of advice. We're going to include your book in the show notes because I do recall having been really well received and unique at the time. Thanks for being here today. This was a really important and meaningful conversation. And whether you're a solo ager, no matter what type or size you are in what's becoming a much broader swath of solo agers, I think the advice you gave us today applies broadly, and we're grateful for it.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciated the opportunity to share that.
That wraps up this week's episode of the Caregivers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropoleski. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Sarah, thank you for helping us talk about something that's easy to avoid until the moment it becomes urgent. I think one of the clearest reminders from this conversation is that independence is not the same thing as a care plan. You can be capable, thoughtful, organized, and deeply independent and still need people, documents, authority, backups, and support in place before a crisis happens. For anyone listening who's aging without reliable family support or who loves someone who is, I hope this conversation doesn't leave you frightened. I hope it leaves you honest. Because the goal is not to panic. The goal is to ask the hard questions now, name the roles that need to be covered, and put support in place before the emergency arrives. Before you go, please subscribe and follow the Caregivers podcast wherever you're listening or watching. It's free, it helps support the show, and it helps these conversations reach more caregivers, families, and solo agers who may be trying to plan for a future they've not known how to face. And if the Caregivers podcast has been helpful to you, please consider buying the team a coffee. We're a new independent show, and every bit of support helps us keep bringing these conversations to caregivers each week. The Buy Me a Coffee link is in the show notes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and we'll be seeing you next time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something important. The conversations you hear on this podcast are here to inform, to support, to spark reflection. They're not a substitute for professional medical advice, care, therapy, or crisis services. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or caregiver-client relationship between us. If you're facing a medical concern, health challenge, a mental health challenge, or a caregiving situation that needs guidance, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified professional who knows your story. If you're ever in crisis, please don't wait. Call your local emergency number or recognize crisis hotline right away. You deserve real-time help and support. The views you hear on this show, whether from me or my guests, are our own. They don't necessarily reflect any organizations we work with, or are part of, or have worked with, or been part of in the past. This podcast is an independent production. It's not tied to any hospital, university, or healthcare system. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for taking the time to care for yourself while you continue to care for others. I look forward to hearing from you.